Recording, and then I will put you on speaker. Can you hear me?
Yep. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. So let's start by having you, where's the phone? Is it in the shot?
I don't think it's in the shot, but I'm here by myself, so I can't see. But I'm pretty sure
Okay.
it's not in the shot.
Okay. Is it like on your lap maybe?
It's on the desk in front of me. I'm kind of leaning against my desk a little bit, so it's sort of in between me and the camera.
Okay. So maybe push it to the side, as far to the side as you can.
Okay. How's that? I mean, you can hear me.
Hopefully it's good.
Yeah.
Okay, so instead, it's always going to be very natural for you to be talking to the phone, like answering these, but keep talking to the camera, and I'll just kind of keep reminding you that.
Sure.
So, look into the camera and tell us your name, your city and state, and your title, and where you work.
Okay, my name is Annika Zappi. I'm in Denver, Colorado. I work for the Punch Bowl Social and Le Grand Bistro and Oyster Bar as their corporate beverage director.
Okay, great. Let's have you say, I am the corporate beverage director for...
Okay. I am the I am the corporate beverage director for Punch Bowl Social and Le Grand Bistro and Oyster Bar in Denver, Colorado.
Yay, clap. Awesome. So how long have you been bartending?
I've been bartending almost 18 years now.
Okay. So let's do a laundry list of like kind of the top places that you've worked at. Like I've bartended at such and such place. Let's have you do like just do a laundry list of like places that people might know. And like I've done drink menus for such and such. I've done cocktail programs for such and such.
Okay. Well, I guess starting in the past and moving forward, I worked for over 12 years at a little bar called the PS Lounge, where I learned my chops from old men. I don't think that's anything that will give me any fame, but that's kind of where I learned to bartend. I had my own little venue that I got to experiment with for a few months under the supervision of my former boss for the PS Lounge, and that was called the Pink Elephant Room. I worked at Jonesy's in Denver for a brief amount of time, kind of in between things. I was was fortunate enough to get a job with a company called Root Down that opened a restaurant in Colorado, in Denver. I created the cocktail menu for Root Down, trained the staff. I worked there for about 3 years before opening their sister restaurant, Linger, several blocks away from Root Down. I also created the opening cocktail menu and the subsequent menus during my tenure at those venues. I changed the menu seasonally. I trained staff. I led consumer cocktail education seminars, so occasionally I do workshops for members of the cocktail imbibing community, our guests, to come and learn about food and drink, and drink especially. And then I took a little time off to have a baby, and wasn't as much time as I thought I was going to have. I had been in talks with the owner of this company, Robert Thompson, for some years, just interested in his concepts, and lo and behold, I became part of one of his concepts as I became the beverage director for Le Grand Bistro and Oyster Bar, and more importantly, I am opening the Punch Bowl Social here in Denver. It just opened 3 weeks ago, 24,000 square feet, a punch-based menu with certain craft cocktails on top of it, featuring rotating specialty cocktails and specialty punches. Focus on fun, focus on cocktails.
Great. So let's so at the beginning, when you say you've been bartending for 18 years, and you worked for 12 years at the PS Lounge. Let's do this in a way so we can just again laundry list it. So I worked for 12 years at the PS Lounge, where I learned how to pour drinks from old men, or so because I think that's fun.
Yeah.
And then you could just say like, and I worked at the Pink Elephant Room. I worked at Jonesy's. and and then you could say that I went to, well, and then it's like your stuff with Root Down is perfect.
Yeah.
So let's just kind of make it a little bit more condensed.
Okay.
For,
Start from the beginning?
Yeah. Just
Okay.
for PS Lounge through Jonesy.
Okay. Well, I've been bartending for 18 years. I got my start at the PS Lounge, where I worked off and on for 12 years, and I was trained bartending by the old men at the bar, which was fun and informative. I worked for a little while at the Pink Elephant Room. I also worked at Lanny's Clock Tower Cabaret, which was burlesque and cocktail joints. And then I was fortunate enough to take a job working for a company called Root Down, who opened a restaurant in Denver Highlands. I created the opening cocktail menu. I ran their beverage program and updated their menu seasonally. I was in charge of training the staff, of course ordering an inventory of the products, and cocktail development in general. I ran consumer education, guest education seminars for cocktails through that venue. And then I went to open their sister venue, Linger, located a few blocks away from Root Down. About 2 years ago, when Linger opened, I created their opening menu. I trained staff as well, and kept up with that seasonal menu creation until I left for maternity leave. And I came back from maternity leave and started becoming what I am now, the corporate beverage director for Punch Bowl Social in Denver, Colorado, and Le Grand Bistro and Oyster Bar in Denver, Colorado. I oversee the beverage program for all of their entities. This business is growing into Portland, Chicago, and Austin in the next calendar year, and I'll be overseeing those venues and those menu selections as well, hiring, training staff, developing bar managers for each of the locations that we're moving into. And that's what I've got going on moving forward.
Perfect. So let's talk about, what do you think that, let's talk about any awards and recognitions that you've received, any media exposure?
Yeah. Okay, well, 2009 was a good year for me. In 2009, I received a few different awards and recognitions. I was fortunate enough to win first place in Denver's Bombay Sapphire Most Inspired Bartender competition. I went to compete in the Nationals in Las Vegas. I was also chosen as one of the top 100 mixologists from Grand Marnier and attended their Vail Mixology Summit that year, was also included with my recipes and likeness in their iPhone app that they put out. I won a 42 Below summer cocktail contest that same year for Below Me. I won second place in a Drambuie competition. That same year in 2009, I attended the Bar Academy in New York City, the Bar 5-day program, and graduated bar certified. Gosh, more recognitions and accolades. I wish I had them all at the tip of my tongue. I kind of generally have to keep a little list to keep them straight, but those are some of the bigger ones. Numerous mentions in local media, Denver papers, Denver Mixologist mentions. Denver Magazine nominated me for Mixologist of the Year in 2009. I've been lucky enough to be included in that group several times with different publications in Colorado.
Perfect. Awesome. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Let's get into let's do like a couple of things.
Okay.
Let's talk about why do you have the top 2 bar rescue? Let's hear about how because some of these people at bar rescue are awful, and you need to kind of be a badass. You need to be able to lift staff into shape. So do you have what it takes?
Yeah, I absolutely believe that I have what it takes to be a great mixology expert on bar rescue. Part of the reason for that is, well, first off, I've opened several restaurants already and done cocktail menu branding and the filling out of a concept. I've hired several staffs now, so And I've also worked with staff that I haven't hired, where I guess is more specifically, you know, where that skill comes into play for bar rescue. One of the things I really have to my advantage, as odd as it might seem, is my rock and roll past, and I'm always shocked at how that kind of comes back to benefit me in my real life. All that time everyone told me I was spinning my wheels, but I definitely learned how to stand up in front of a group of people and be the loudest girl in the room. I learned how to command attention. You know, when you're on stage, and if you have a half attentive audience, I've learned several times in several ways, you know, how to command full attention, and I think that that's important. I think that also gives me an approachability to a lot of people that maybe you're very uber nerdy, mustachioed bartender, mixologist type person might not be able to come across to everyone as being as accessible as I am. I definitely have a little bit of lowbrow to me, but I think I've got the perfect marriage of lowbrow and professionalism that kind of can bridge the gap for some people and get them from, you know, inspire them to a form of bartending. I think that I've been able to inspire my bar staffs personally over time, with just the historical importance of who bartenders are and what they bring to the table and how much pride we should feel in our work and what we do. I think I have a lot of stories and a lot of historical anecdotes and whatnot that brings people around to feeling pride in their craft and really owning what it is to be a great bartender.
So, what happens? Like, do you take shit from people? If somebody, like, if you're getting back talk from, like, a bunch of guys, like, do you, like, take any shit from them?
Absolutely not. I think that as a woman in this industry especially, I've had to learn early on how to put my foot down, but also I'm not a fan of burning bridges. I think that there's a great skill to putting your foot down, to being firm, and being friendly and being liked at the same time. I think a lot of women fall into a trap of wanting to be liked and not wanting to be firm. But I think it's even more than a female thing. I think it's really important for bartenders in general to have that skill. You are in control of your bar. You need to be the one that can firmly cut someone off, but also do it in a friendly and loving way that makes them want to establish, or makes them want to come back to your establishment. If you want that guest back, I guess is up for you to decide. But that is part of the subtlety of what makes us professional bartenders, being able to be respected, being able to control things, but being able to be gracious as well.
Perfect. So let's get into the science. Let's delve into your science facts now.
Sure.
If you want to do whatever you want to do. If you want to do ag work, if you want to do the making punch. Let's talk about making punch, because it's Punch Bowl.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to talk about Punch. You know, the venue that I'm most busy with these days is the Punch Bowl Social, and that was one of the things that really encouraged me to working with this company in the first place. Is I loved the marriage of concepts. It's a small bowling alley and sort of gaming type club, but it's mixed with some craft cocktails, and although it's 24,000 square feet, it feels intimate. We have 3 bars. So Punch is in its nature something that is already designed to service a lot of people in a quick fashion. It's one of our very first batched drinks historically, and so I've educated all my bartenders in sort of the craft of punch. We have 4 punch recipes on our menu at any given time, and then we have rotating featured punches that we like to do. I think the basis with any punch is an oleo sacrum, and that is kind of a nerdy scientific term. It's basically sugar oil is what that boils down to. And the way you make sugar oil is by peeling citrus. Primarily you're going to be working with lemons and oranges in that regard. Lime peels, the oil in lime tends to be a little bit too bitter and pithy to really make this a useful technique for limes. But for lemons and oranges, you would make an oleo sacrum by peeling as much of that peel you can, trying to leave as much pith as you can on the orange. And then you can do two things at that point. You can either muddle it with sugar, which is a faster process if you're trying to make punch in a hurry, or and even then you would probably want to muddle it and let it sit for a little bit. But what I like to do in making oleo sacrum in my venue, because we are such high volume and we do go through so much of this, we peel our lemons and oranges, we put them into delis, and then we put sugar on top of it. Rather than muddling it with the sugar naturally starts reacting with the oils in the citrus, and it pulls the oils from the peels out into the sugar. So the oil from the citrus is going to mix with the sugar, and that's going to create what's called the oleo sacrum. And it's basically a simple syrup, a sugar syrup, that's made just with citrus oil. It's extremely fragrant, extremely flavorful. I tend to still mix that with some citrus in my punches, but I look at that almost as bitters, or another way to layer flavor into a cocktail. You could just be putting a plain sugar or plain simple syrup into your punch, but instead you've made an oleo sacrum, which is a beautiful, fragrant, flavorful combination of oil and sugar. And punch in its base elements is going to have 5 components. It's going to have a sweet, a sour, a strong, a weak, and a spice. So the oleo sacrum functions as its sweet. We're going to look at things like lemon juice, orange juice, any kind of citrus juice, possibly even some vinegars for our sour. A lot of historical punch applications used shrub syrup more liberally. Shrub is can be made with citrus juice, but shrub is more known as a kind of a vinegar preparation. Still, it's acidic, and it's a vinegar preparation that's mixed with fruit. Most shrubs are rested and aged for at least a few weeks before they're used in any cocktail application, and that's very important for shrubs because that lets that bracing acetic acid acidity from the vinegar to kind of round out and marry with some of those beautiful fruit flavors that hopefully you've introduced. Pardon me. So we've got in punch, we've got a sweet, we've got a sour. Then your strong, of course, is going to be your base spirit or base spirits. Not all punches are a singular spirit. A lot of punches actually have a lot of different spirits going on there, but they can be one or many. And then a weak element, which is important to punch. Punch was originally meant as almost a replacement for wine. When wine was less available and distilled spirits were more available, people were mixing these spirits in a way to reduce the strength of it to a place that's more quaffable. That's where our weak element comes in punches. It's either going to be something like a tea or a juice that doesn't have a really high acid profile on one end or another. Sometimes a sparkling water, even soda pop in some more modern punches is utilized. I think that sparkling wine is also a nice element, although it's arguably not the weakest element that could be weak. The 5th element of punch is spice, and that can be brought to the party anywhere from, like a fresh ground nutmeg, which is a very traditional punch application of spice, to bitters, which we see pretty frequently. Spice can also be brought to a punch from different liqueurs or amaros, different kinds of herbal liqueurs that people might be using in their punch mixtures. But I don't consider it a punch unless I can taste all 5 of those elements. If you're missing a few of those elements, you might be looking at something more on the lines of a classic sour with sweet and sour and spirit in it, and you're missing your weak and your spice, and that's fine too. It's a great cocktail. It's just not a punch. Is that specific enough about punch?
Yeah, that's great.
Good.
Why would you bring a spice into a punch? What's the purpose of that?
The purpose of spice in punch really harkens back to the original point of punch, I think, being a more quaffable spirit, being a spirit that's more like wine. And also that ties into a little bit of the weak element of punch, where traditionally we see a lot of tea used. Well, we know wine has these wonderful tannins in it that is something that we enjoy about drinking wine, and that's hard found in cocktails. Uh, Unless you're using a lot more barrel aged things, or you'll see tannins and lignins in some of our barrel aged whiskeys and brandies and things. But otherwise, we're looking at the tannins that we get in tea to bring that tannic wine taste around. And spice was very simply just adding complexity to that drink, the same kind of complexity you would probably get in some wine. Wine with its different terroir and aging techniques just naturally kind of has a complexity that distilled spirits don't have. Distilled spirits tend to be more controlled, and the process of distillation sometimes strips a lot of those complexities out of things. So adding spice into punch is another way to add interest and flavor and make it interesting. That's what people wanted to do a couple hundred years ago when they started drinking punch.
Perfect. So let's see. Let's talk a little bit about maybe the egg whites and drinks.
Yeah.
And why you would use that, and what you'll have to start from the beginning on that one.
Yeah, sure. Well, I love using egg whites in drinks. I really love teaching my bar staff about using egg whites in drinks because I think it's a real eye-opener for some people. You know, a lot of professional bartenders these days are pretty comfortable with using egg whites, but there's still a number of people in the public that don't understand what it is and what it does, and why on earth would you put egg in a drink? Well, an egg white is protein, and it's really there to add texture to a cocktail. It really only works in the presence of an acid. When you mix lemon juice, or the acid in a lemon or lime juice, with the protein in an egg white, it's going to unravel the protein bonds that are inside that egg white. Before you have this egg white and it's held tightly together, you introduce acid into it and it starts expanding those protein bonds. When you are shaking that, then agitating that, that's reforming all of those protein bonds. It's breaking them up, it's mixing them up, it's allowing air to penetrate into them, and that's really why we use egg whites. It's got this great way of aerating a cocktail, and if it's used in the right proportion, not too much, I'd say generally a half an ounce to 3/4 of an ounce is plenty for a cocktail. I'm more on the half an ounce side of things. I think a dab will do you when it comes to egg whites. Using too much egg whites, on that note, can impart sort of what we call like a wet dog flavor to cocktails. It might not be immediately apparent to your guests or some drinkers, but I think a skilled bartender would be able to pick that flavor out when it's overused. But basically, you want to use egg whites in cocktails that you would like to sort of suspend the flavors of. So it's introducing air into the drink. It's creating a frothiness and foaminess and a suspension, if you will. So I think you know, for one instance of a cocktail that I've used egg whites in was one with a reposado, tequila, and Saint Germain elderflower liqueur, which is, you know, we call the bartender's ketchup nowadays. It's certainly gotten overused, but it's a good example of a liqueur that's very complex and has different components, whether it's sweetness or acidity or floral notes. I used the sage simple syrup, I think, also in that cocktail. But I wanted the tequila to marry really pretty with those elderflower and those floral notes from the Saint Germain. And putting the egg white in there suspended everything and allows the drinker to have that enter into their palate a little more slowly and completely. It's not just going to hit one part of your tongue and kind of head towards the back of the throat. It really coats everything. That suspension and that protein gives it more time to break down in your palate. And with some drinks that's preferable, and with some drinks it's not. So egg white isn't an across the board application. I think it works best with when you're using really pretty delicate liqueurs and possibly even bitters in an application, something that you really want to pick out all the delicacies of. You're going to get a nice pretty frothy drink, which is also beautiful for different garnishing applications or making designs on your egg foam on top of your cocktail with bitters. I've seen other people doing spray atomizers and stencils, and those are really fun too. So I think bitters and egg whites marry very nicely together as well.
Perfect. And we will move on to some of the science stuff.
Sure.
Thank you for being so awesome with explaining everything. I love it.
Good. I take some of this stuff for granted sometimes, I think it's like the kind of things that I tell my bar staff, but when it comes time to, really explain what it is that I do, it's weird when you're just facing a camera in a room by yourself.
Right. Well, and that's good. Remember to keep looking at the camera.
Yeah.
And let's talk about, kind of your biggest pet peeve behind the bar, which actually kind of also goes into, what are the 5 most neglected areas behind the bar from, cleanliness to organizational standpoint? And those probably will be the same.
Yeah, I mean, I have pet peeves behind a bar that are on a very tangible technical side of things, and then I have service pet peeves. So I'm assuming that you're looking more for sort of my technical pet peeves.
Yeah.
So, things that I think are really careful to watch for behind a bar that I see being neglected very often behind bars. For one, I would have to say beer traps and beer lines. Most of the companies we work with, and I think this is an industry standard these days, have their own draft line techs that come out and clean your beer lines. But I think it's important to make sure that that's being maintained and done regularly. And I think that equipment needs to be meticulously cleaned every day. By the nature of what we're working with fermented products of various sorts, when those things get messy and they get under bar mats, for instance, that aren't picked up and cleaned, there's a smell that develops, and it's not an easy smell to get rid of. The best way to get rid of it is to not let it start, but that's not always possible. So I think definitely a careful cleaning of beer traps. I think a really bad habit that people get into is not properly cleaning and storing bar mats in between shifts. Sometimes even if people are cleaning them, they'll put them back into the rails when they're wet, and that's another great way to promote kind of a mildewy situation.
And let me just ask you again about the beer traps and the beer lines. You kind of touched on the fact that it's fermented, that it's creating a fermentation. But let's talk a little bit of why that happens. Why, if you don't clean your beer traps and your beer lines, why, what occurs specifically?
Well, when you make beer, you're using yeast. The yeast is feeding on the sugar and different elements in a beer. So beer essentially has yeast. It still has some sugar in it. It has all of the things that yeast like to eat in it as well. These are all the things that bacteria also like to eat. And there is still active yeast in beer, even after it's kegged and served. So, and that's one of the reasons we like to drink it. It smells very wonderful and yeasty. But having that stuff out in the air, exposed to the air, exposed to the heat, allows bacteria and yeast to continue growing. Especially bacteria is the really gnarly part of that. I don't really know how to make that more specific. You have wet spilled beer around, and you're going to have bacteria growing in it. I think that's as simple as it gets.
Perfect. So let's have you say that maybe your biggest, in a sentence of my biggest pet peeve is dirty beer traps and beer lines.
Okay, one of my biggest pet peeves behind a bar is going to be dirty traps and beer lines. I think it's a breeding ground for bacteria, and it creates a really bad smell that could be easily avoided with a little bit of cleaning every day.
Perfect. And I think at this point we'll stop, because we've done a long time and we've really got into that with the punch and everything. You can press stop.
Okay, great. Let me get that.
You did a great job.
Thank you.